So last time we had you on Crypto World, it was early 2022. We'd just come off the crazy run up in 2021. Things were looking bright for crypto. And then you sort of know what happened last year. So what was 2022 like for Solana? What were the biggest lessons for you?
Yeah, in 2022, Solana, just like the year before, was, pretty far and away the fastest growing blockchain network by users, by developers, and by the number of use cases that were being tested simultaneously on the network. I think 2022 was a big stress test for the network, but also it was a stress test for the community because with things like the collapse of FTX, the confidence in crypto was really strained. But I think just like cycles before, a lot of folks in crypto that have been around since 2014, 2017 know that kind of the most impressive and interesting products get built when the hype and noise dies down. And so what we've seen over the last 6 to 8 months is just really intense building, really high signal, high quality builders, and the user experience is just improving relentlessly because the underlying infrastructure is so much more battle tested. So that's what's exciting coming up. There's always another cycle. And I think this time around, it'll be just that much more, ready for mainstream.
So if I think about one of the biggest challenges for Solana from the outside, it was downtime. You had pretty big outages and only one this year. So what kind of work have you been doing to address that concern from users and developers?
Yeah, as I mentioned, that downtime for Solana was largely a function of being the first high throughput blockchain that was built from the ground up for performance, and then seeing the most growth and the most stress testing from a variety of use cases in 2021 and 2022. So it was pretty high profile. Since then, almost every proof of stake blockchain has gone down, but Solana has had 100% uptime for most of this year. And that's really off the back of a series of upgrades that started in 2021. It's very, difficult and complex to upgrade blockchains, as you saw with things like Ethereum making the switch to proof of stake. With Solana, some pretty heavy duty upgrades got pushed, and what we've seen now is all these use cases are at the levels they've been at, and sometimes exceeding them from 2021 and 2022, and the network is just performing admirably. And so we're excited to see, where the next stress test comes from.
So just generally, what does development look like on Solana through the crash last year and into 2023? People have all said the bear market is a time to build. You said that a couple of minutes ago. Are you seeing that happen within the Solana ecosystem?
Yeah, if you look at things like the Electric Developer Report, Solana continues to be the fastest growing blockchain by developers. We've done hackathons at Solana Foundation every quarter, and actually the number of teams submitting has gone up every quarter, over the last 2 years, and that trend doesn't seem to be stopping. What does seem to be changing is just the level of conviction. A lot of the builders are, less confident about an ability to, hit the market and find large market caps really quickly. They have to focus on really strong user experience, really great products, and deliver value. So we've seen, especially a lot of real world use cases, real infrastructure getting built on Solana, like Helium building a global 5G network, HiveMapper building a decentralized mapping a service, and Render that's building a decentralized GPU network for rendering and AI training. These are all, real use cases where users can contribute resources and labor and earn money, and they're actually growing a lot faster than their centralized counterparts.
So if we're looking at 2023's challenges, it's obviously regulation. Solana was implied to be a security by the SEC in one of its many legal actions this year. The Solana Foundation came out pretty directly and said it's not a security. Now there's a question about whether the courts will side with the SEC or not. Now that we have this sort of competing set of rulings out of New York, what's your view on the likelihood of Solana being deemed a security, and how are you approaching that risk in the US?
Well, I'm hesitant to comment on, ongoing court cases, especially ones where we're not participating or involved. But I think the tenor of the crypto industry right now is pretty optimistic, especially after things like the Ripple ruling. And I think the pressure in places like Congress with congressmen like McHenry and Richie Torres is showing a lot of really positive signs. It looks like Congress folks understand the value of crypto. Their constituents are calling them every day, talking about use cases and products that they care about. And I think there's a lot of legislative pressure to create, more clear and actionable guidelines for how to operate in crypto. And that's what everyone wants, right? We just want clarity. I think lack of regulatory clarity has held the industry back for several years. And it seems like we're on the verge of getting that, hopefully from Congress.
I agree that there was a lot of optimism following the Ripple lawsuit, but you saw Coinbase's stock tank after you got essentially conflicting rulings out of the same legal jurisdiction, SDNY. So obviously, investor confidence was rocked by this challenging ruling. So any thoughts on that and how it might upend the thesis a lot of people had out of the Ripple case?
I think all I'll say is I still feel confident. I think the industry feels confident, and Coinbase is doing a really great job, defending the industry and helping to create clear guidelines.
Some crypto exchanges like Robinhood actually delisted Solana after it was mentioned in those SEC suits. Has the foundation been in touch with them to discuss the issue? Have you addressed any of the concerns that they expressed?
I think it's pretty understandable for U.S. businesses that are not primarily crypto businesses. We see this in every market cycle. Crypto tourists, businesses that have very small product lines in crypto kind of recede when it gets hot in the kitchen. My understanding of folks like Robinhood and other products is that these were, pretty small product lines. I think the more important thing is, folks like Coinbase, Binance, and other exchanges that represent the largest majority of trading volumes and activity for users, they're not taking any meaningful action that I think limits consumers' access to these assets. So that's great to see, and that's what I expect to continue to see. I think it is, though, it should be important for legislators and users to recognize that creating pressure for innovators to move offshore is not a great thing. That's not a great result. And right now, it does seem like some of that hesitance from centralized actors in the U.S. is pushing people to think about their crypto strategy or their product launches as primarily offshore first. And that's really disappointing to see. So Solana was started out of San Francisco, where we live in America, Anatoly and I think crypto was really born in the U.S. and we want to see it stay here.
One other piece of Solana news I want to ask about is the phone. So it's called the Saga. You released it back in the spring. What has demand looked like there? Have you seen people using it? What's the measure of success here?
Yeah, so the power users of Solana, most of them have a Solana Saga at this point. It's a few thousand in sales, so I kind of liken it to the original, Tesla Roadster. It's a proof of concept where new use cases are being built, and the quality of signing transactions across the operating system is just like butter. It's like if Apple was to ship a crypto native device or operating system. So it's still early days. We're in the developer phase of seeing what products and use cases get built there. But if you look back at 2021, 2022, some of the biggest breakout use cases on Solana, even though they look like toys, things like Stepin, which was walking to earn and creating a mapping solution, these things couldn't be launched today in the App Store with Apple's restrictions. And I think developers really feel the pain of 30% tax, especially when their products require users to have frictionless transfer of assets, and those assets have value that shouldn't be taxed.
So carriers sort of control the narrative around phones here in the US. It's really hard to drive customers to a device other than an iPhone or Samsung Galaxy. Are you trying to ultimately reach customers in the US, or is this more about adoption abroad?
It's really global. I mean, outside of the US, 80% of mobile phone users use Android, and it's pretty clear that pressure from things like Saga to create clear channels in the App Store for developers and users cause things like the Google App Store policies to change. So Google has now announced that they're allowing NFTs. They created a set of pretty clear guidelines about what it looks like to launch crypto apps in the App Store, and that forward progress, I think, has to happen with real competitive pressure from devices where users are expressing their preference to use crypto assets without restrictions.
Let's talk about NFTs. So demand for them broadly has dropped off from the craze in 2021. In your July network performance report, though, you talk about some of the improvements to NFTs on the platform, costing only about 50 SOL or around $1,100 to mint 100 million NFTs. How much are NFTs part of the appeal for Solana's network?
Well, it's very important. I think what we've learned in the last few years is that NFTs, while they may look silly to someone who's not participating in crypto, they are the most consumable, intuitive way for somebody to onboard to self-custody and, the weirdness of interacting with a blockchain and having custody of your own assets and signing transactions. And so, there was a wave of typically high value kind of luxury signaling use case NFTs. And those have largely, dropped in value. But what Solana is always focused on is bringing the cost of commerce with an asset class down as close to the cost of the hardware and the network bandwidth as possible. So things like compressed NFTs, as you mentioned, making, the cost of 100 million NFTs really only a few $100s. That basically is free. And so we see use cases like Drip that has replatformed, hundreds of creators and hundreds of thousands of users so that the subscription between a creator and a user is effectively accruing 100% of the value back to the creator. We see things like Dialect recreating, messaging, almost like a super app like WeChat, but with hundreds of NFTs being transferred and moved, every day between users. There have been 135,000 minters and 1.1 million collectibles minted on Dialect, and that's just with a very small beta user base. So what we're seeing now is I think in the next cycle we'll start focusing on customer acquisition cost and retention for these users. And you'll start to see NFTs at a volume of what you see on something like Instagram, but the user base will go beyond that, few 100,000 that it's been for the past couple of years.
Last question for you. Looking ahead, what's on the roadmap for Solana that devs or users should look forward to? What are you building, for example, in spite of the scrutiny for the entire industry right now?
There's really a number of things. I think one that we haven't talked about already is Fire Dancer. So Jump Trading is creating a separate validator client from scratch. It's benchmarked at a few 100,000 transactions per second. Solana so far has been benchmarked up to tens of thousands of transactions per second. And over the past several months, it's averaged about 4,000 transactions per second of demand. But at hundreds of thousands, you could put NASDAQ and Visa and Google on chain, and it would still be consumer grade and performant. So I think that's again the focus that Solana has always had as an ecosystem, as a community, is just making this as cheap and fast as possible and continuing to push on that front to see what new use cases get unlocked. Because by our opinion, tens of dollars, hundreds of dollars per transaction is just not what it's going to take to scale crypto to millions of users.